Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the WSBA Crypto Roundup. I'm David Brill, joined as always by Josh Klayman and Ron Quaranta. Today is August 7th, the last day the Senate was supposed to be in session before recess. And if you were hoping the Clarity Act would be law by now, it isn't. The Senate went into recess without a cloture vote. The bill is punted to September, and Polymarket gives it a 17% chance of passing in 2026. We have a lot to say today about the Wall Street Journal editorial board, Elizabeth Warren, Senator Thune's direct statement, and what happens to every stakeholder in this industry now that clarity has been delayed, including what it means for senators facing voters in November. Ron, let's get into it.
David, good to see you. Let's do our disclaimers. I want to stop for 1 second, David, and point out Josh looks like she has our Acapulco look on. I'm not sure where she is, but Josh, it's good to see you.
Thank you. I will just say I'm nowhere special, but I just happen to not blow out my hair.
For everyone in the audience, thank you so much for joining us on LinkedIn Live, on YouTube, on X. Before we begin, obviously our usual disclaimers. Nothing the three of us are discussing is anything like investment accounting or legal advice. And really the conversation, our own personal opinions, not necessarily the opinions of our respective organizations. David, you queued it up. Folks in the audience, you know David's riled up when you get 18 different text messages from him right after 10 a.m. So David, there's a lot to cover there. I want to let you kick it off. I mean, what's happened for the audience? Well,
as most of the audience can see, I'm wearing a We the People shirt from the 250th anniversary of our country. And I think, we the people are not being served right now. And I think that not putting this up for a vote before the August recess really deprives, the American public of seeing who is really voting against this bill. And I mentioned that, Senator Thune said that the Democrats were pushing back, were insistent on a no clarity vote. And, I think that's something we need to delve into. And I think before I go into it more, I think Josh has some insight she wants to share from some of her conversations with our Washington friends.
Yes. So there's a lot I would like to share. I'm wondering whether, though, is it better if I just dump it out now or have it come out organically as we discuss? Okay.
Let the floodgates open.
All right. Letting the floodgates open. Okay. So what I had heard as of today is that if the cloture vote had been allowed to go forward, it wouldn't have failed. To your point, David, we would have known who would have voted against it. But I think the fear was that if they had put it forward this week, it would have failed by a significant margin, and that could have meant the end of clarity. I think some of the things that I've been hearing is that there's a fear that banks are going to really re-engage about the stablecoin rewards point, and that there's a lot of pressure right now on that, and there's a concern by some that actually may ramp up during the August recess. My understanding is that banks are looking to strike from, and banks writ large, okay, I don't know who this banks is, okay, so just everyone in the audience, all caveats apply, but that there is a request to strike the word solely from the draft, but that was, my understanding was never on the table and is a non-starter. Obviously, there's a lot of concern about this, about whether this is reopening what people thought were settled. As we know, a number of digital native firms are pursuing OCC charters, right, as we wait to see what's happening. Obviously, those responsible for getting the text that was the compromise are looking to keep that and are pushing to keep that. I won't go into that at this exact moment. My understanding about some of the other things is that the BRCA is still, there are still open points about that law enforcement issues remain unresolved, including around appropriations, that ag negotiations on vertical integration and ethics still aren't resolved. And going into something like just briefly with a toe in the water on this, on the prediction markets point, which has become more and more of a headline, my understanding is, and again, all of this may be incorrect, is that the tribes are looking for protection for their prediction markets and are also looking at the DeFi protections and provisions in that context to try and look at potential loopholes that may exist. Obviously, the ethics for government officials is still very controversial. And we saw last week that the CFTC announced the rulemaking on vertical integration, which obviously is complicated because we're discussing this in the context of clarity. So the last thing I will say before pausing on this is that my understanding is that in connection with the prediction markets piece, which my hope is, I mean, just as a person, not as anyone else, is that will be dealt with sometime later and will not hold up clarity. But my understanding is that those pushing for it right now, a ban of prediction markets and sports betting is not on the table, but that labor and travel groups have picked off some Democrats on this issue of amending the CEA to address prediction markets, especially because we don't yet know what the CFTC is going to be doing in terms of rulemaking for this. My understanding from those who know far more than I, although again, all caveats apply, is that the prediction markets piece could potentially be landing with some sort of a savings clause if it gets in there that wouldn't allow clarity to overrule or supersede tribal or state laws about gaming and gambling, but that there's some pushback from Republicans about that. So now you know what I have heard, and I will pause.
So those were the floodgates. Wow. Josh, I appreciate it. David, let me, there's a lot to unpack. And I just want to lead off, David, with one thing that you and I were talking about a bit earlier in the virtual green room. I am struck, and Josh, you referenced this, by how much of the things that everyone thought were essentially settled are actually not settled. I'm thinking rewards, certainly. Apparently DeFi crept back into the conversation. But David, the other side of this is always the really disappointing perspective on the politics of it. Just the idea, and I get how that operates. I mean, I almost wish we had Adam Goldberg on. Shout out to Adam, kind of talking about the politics of it. Just not voting and not bringing something forward, just to not be recognized on the record for not voting for something because of PAC money, is a real disservice to the American people. You know, and the media picks up on this immediately as well, David and Josh. The other side of it is, look at all of these law enforcement agencies who are really against clarity passing. It wasn't 2 weeks ago when we had seen major law enforcement organizations say, we now support clarity because of some of the provisions that have been put forward. So there's a lot there. I'm going to remain hopeful about the post-August recess, but obviously I'm not wagering on Polymarket. David, tell me where I'm wrong.
No, look, I think you're right. And actually, you know, I was reading CoinDesk, and one source familiar told CoinDesk late Thursday that Senate Democrats did not want to have to vote on the bill prior to the midterm election and would have delayed the rest of the Senate's agenda. Clarity wasn't punted to next month. Yep. And I think this is really like another important feature. The Democrats weren't blocking the bill purely on policy grounds. They were blocking it to avoid a politically difficult vote before November. I think this is a distinction that matters enormously for how we interpret their stated, opposition. And again, I think I've said this before, that it's really unfortunate that this is coming in an election year, and that we have some of these things that are coming to pass. But this bill needs to be voted on. We need to know early in September who supports it and who doesn't support it. And then, all our lobbyists on behalf of the crypto industry can act accordingly.
David, to that point, saying it shouldn't, let me ask this question for the three of us. If it weren't an election year, would it have passed?
I would like to think it would have passed. I think that it may have gone on further in the calendar year. But I do think there's a need for this. And I think, and we're going to go into this later, there's such a major miscalculation being made by, multiple players without this getting passed. In some ways, if you think about stablecoins and the Genius Act, anybody is going to be able to give rewards under the Genius Act, as long as they fit into one of those categories with no restrictions. Whereas, if we have, clarity, there'll be more restrictions. So I think what's ironic is that people don't realize like what they're going to be losing if they don't pass this bill.
Yeah. Go ahead, Josh.
And I agree. I also would think, I mean, with what David, I don't know if you just said this or Ron did. Apologies that I don't remember which of you just said this, but that people were trying to wait until after the elections to get this vote done. I mean, I agree with whoever said we need to know before the elections who's voting against it, because that's relevant to a vote of an election. So.
Which shows you, and I know this sounds really cynical of me, David and Josh, and for everyone in the audience, I try not to be this cynical, but they're actively working to not show voters how they weigh in on a particular issue just to get through the finish line of winning the election, rather. That is really a disservice to the voting public. And I get it. There are other things that the public is worried about, David and Josh. We've spoken about this K-shaped economy, inflation. I get all of that, but conversation's been going on for a while, and it is sad how much the politics impedes progress.
Go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
Apparently, I have like way too much to say today. What I really find frustrating, though, is that if these, like, I understand that there's a piece that needs to say, okay, like there's a strategy for saying, okay, we've got all this stuff resolved. We're just going through it, even if some things are being resolved on the back end. But it is deeply disappointing and frustrating, I think, to hear like, okay, we've reached the compromise, and then wait, what? We haven't, or it's still open, or now there's the next thing. Like, I think there just needs to be a point where it just stops, like,
And how much of it is the optics also, David? You and I, again, were talking about this a bit earlier, and political party or persuasion aside, Senator Warren suddenly sending a note rather, to SEC Chair Atkins demanding an investigation on Trump activities in crypto. I think Senator Blumenthal did something similar. I mean, the timing of this is suspect in my mind.
Yeah, look, I think people need to remember that the crypto voting bloc is larger than most politicians realize. And I'm going to go back to this CoinDesk article again that, a source familiar told CoinDesk that they didn't, Democrats didn't want to have a vote on this prior to the midterms. And it tells you everything how they view the political risk. They're more afraid of voting yes and alienating their base than they are voting no and alienating crypto voters. And I think that calculus may be wrong. According to Stand With Crypto, there's more than 52 million Americans who own crypto. And polling consistently shows that crypto ownership skews younger, increasingly bipartisan, and concentrated in exactly the swing states and competitive districts that determine electoral outcomes: Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Florida. These are not fringe voters, and they are the margin of victory in close races.
Yeah. And David, again, the cynical aspect of it, they're also delaying the inevitable from a funding and PAC perspective by not voting against it. If they had planned to vote against it, vote your ethics, vote against it, politicians want that PAC money.
Yeah. And like we said before, the crypto industry has both the money and the organizational capacity to make those consequences felt. So I really think it's imperative that there is a vote on this.
Can I talk? Go ahead. I'm sorry, David.
And that people take their positions and vote on the record.
Yep. Can I ask one more thing, David, Josh? When I look at the media reporting of it, and I'm not bashing any particular media outlet, David, I didn't mention this earlier, but when you hear the crypto lobby or the crypto industry, some media still carries this kind of negative connotation to it. Like it's a bunch of money launderers who are donating PAC money, a bunch of people who want to evade taxes. And you hear that undertone of conversation. Why hasn't that changed when you look at 50 million people own crypto, when you look at major banks and brokerage firms involved? I don't get it, candidly.
I don't get it either. And I think it's a little bit of journalistic laziness. And I think it's also devaluing that this group of crypto holders have formed lobbying groups with serious lobbyists, and they represent like an important part of our, citizenry. So, I do think we should talk about the Wall Street Journal op-ed and what it got
Yep.
wrong.
Yeah.
Because I have to say, I've always liked the Journal. I read the Journal, and I mostly like the op-ed, page and the opinion page. But I really think this op-ed was really materially deficient, and it was disappointing to see this come out.
Yeah. Josh, do you think is this an opening for Josh and David and Ron to draft an op-ed response?
I mean, I think someone should draft a response, whether it's us or someone else. And certainly we did see on Twitter or X, other social media kind of rebuttals or objections to this. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know what it makes me think of? Remember when Gary Gensler was writing the op-eds?
Oh God. I mean,
Where was he writing them? I can't remember, but I just remember him, I definitely think the timing, not good. And the fact that I understand it's an opinion piece, but don't people have to vet that? I actually don't know what the journalistic standards are, but doesn't someone have to actually see, like,
where are the fact checkers?
Is what's being said factually accurate?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I suspect the editorial board will be hearing from a lot of people. And in full disclosure, I think it was the Crypto Council for Innovation. Shout out to that group who submitted an actual response to Wall Street Journal. David, I'll have to look it up, but it's worth the pushback because the Journal gets a lot right. But if you're going to be not factually checking some of your opinions, then it's worth the argument and the pushback. Josh, David is going to educate you and I, though, on market dynamics. Do you know why?
Yes, please.
In the face of all of this, Bitcoin broke 65,000 last night. So I have to ask the question, David. Everyone that I know who would have said, if Clarity doesn't pass, Ron, the floor for Bitcoin is going to be 50K, apparently has not been looking at my terminal. And it makes me wonder how the industry is responding to what's happening and who's doing the buying. I think I know, but I want to hear your opinion.
So I think a couple of things are at play. I think that, one, you could say that sentiment, that maybe that crypto ownership and sentiment was that this wasn't going to get passed.
Yeah.
And so they're not viewing it as it's not a catalyst for a price increase, but it's also not something that's going to bring the price down. And I think we also have to remember that Bitcoin isn't really affected by Clarity. Bitcoin has its status, and it is not really affected by the Clarity, vote. So I think the prices there on Ethereum aren't going to change.
Yeah.
So why is it responding positively is that the July jobs report missed economists' expectations by a wide margin. So 23,000 jobs were lost instead of 80,000 jobs, economists expected. And the unemployment rate is ticking down to 4.1%. And why that's important is that it makes the likelihood of a Fed increase in September much lower. Mm-hmm. And so, no Fed increase, cheaper money, better for risk on. Risk on. So, I think that's really what's at play here.
David, can I push on a couple of those? And I'm with you, and Josh, I certainly want to get your perspectives on it. I'm with you on the jobs data, which for everyone in the audience was the second downward revision on expectations of increases in payrolls. So David, you and I can have the conversation about it's not the data, it's the revisions. But I think a couple of things. When you look at the broad Bitcoin market, I get that it's not impacted by Clarity per se, but it is a proxy in many ways for broad crypto. And I think whether or not Clarity passes, investors want certainty. And I can almost see some people looking at the markets and saying, all right, it's not going to pass, probably won't pass in September. At least I know, and at least I can act on some of that. So David, I'm with you in the broad spectrum of it as well. And I just want to point out for the group, Josh, I think we said it last week or the week before, I'm still anticipating a rate cut before the end of the year, David. Josh, how does the Klayman family office look at all of this data?
So mostly through the lens of our texts, but I will say, in terms of who's buying, I mean, am I correct in my understanding that it is largely, or that there have been some significant moves by older wallets?
Yeah, I think it's older wallets. I think it's some of the whales that are out there, David. I think I sent both of you a
That's what
text message.
I was using that as a euphemism.
Older wallets. Yeah, look, I think some of the bottom level looking, I think we're setting up a good floor on broad crypto prices. And David, you see some of that also. I think we've had pretty significant inflows into the BTC and other ETFs.
Yeah.
In the space. So I think take a little uncertainty off the table. We can all whinge and moan about clarity depending on where that goes and complain about the election, which is all valid. But at some point, investors in the market are going to say, all right, well, I've got to take action. And I think the action is, this is a floor for me. I'm going to start buying.
And is my recollection correct that we also saw that with ETH?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
I mean, look, fundamentally, we've always been talking about builders keep building, and the products and services that are offered are just continuing to evolve, tokenization and, a number of different initiatives, and a lot of stable coins are, based on Ethereum. So I think, if you look at the technical side of it too, like the 54 to 64 range is a really good buying range. And so even if we're like at 65, if you're a long-term holder, again, we're not giving an investment advice. If you're a long-term holder, this is an attractive place to start building a position or adding to a position.
Yep.
I think you have from here probably 20% downside, and then the upside is where you sort of think Bitcoin's going to go.
Yeah, David and Josh, if you'll permit me, I want to do a shout out to one of the co-chairs of our tokenization working group, David Wysocki. He sent me a note in anticipation of the three of us looking at the jobs data, the payroll data. He noted that the plunge occurred in the prime age participation rates, 25 to 54-year-olds. And in other words, the prime age had been unusually strong for a period of time. It was the lowest since 2023. June partly brought that back in line. David, it reminds me of reversion to mean, which is always something we have to keep in mind. So when we look at data and people are like, oh my goodness, we 20,000 jobs down, reversion to mean is a real thing across markets.
Yeah, and look, I think we lost a lot of hospitality jobs this month.
Yep.
The World Cup ended. There was a lot of hiring for the World Cup. So it's very possible that, those were seasonal jobs and they were lost after this event happened.
Yep.
And is that supported by the idea, like I think you said a couple of minutes ago, that there were more jobs lost and yet unemployment trended down? Mm-hmm. So is that supportive of this idea that these were just opportunistic jobs that were, for a particular?
Yeah. Well, there's always a seasonality aspect, right? To these data points, Josh, to that point, and there's always some percentage when you look at payrolls data in particular. And it's frightening that I know some of this, but David, you and I have talked about this, that some percentage of those numbers represent people dropping out of the labor force for a wide variety of different reasons. Sometimes they are temporary work, sometimes they end up retiring. So there's a lot of underlying data behind the data around, job payrolls went down. So to that point, there's a seasonality aspect to a lot of it. But David still wants the terminal rate for interest rates for inflation to not be 2%.
Yes. I still wanted to go to 3%, even if that's not politically expedient. I think that's where it should be. And I think that's realistically what it will be going forward. I mean, I think who really thinks that inflation is going to go down to 2% as a terminal rate? Like
the Fed chair does, is who thinks that, David.
Well, I would love to see how they think we're going to get there, because it just doesn't seem.
I'll invite him to a happy hour. We can talk about it.
I'd love to fly up to Washington, have a conversation, and hear how they think we're going to get there.
Yeah, David, Josh, the other part of all of this that I think about, we all see the regular news. Before I do this, for everyone in the audience, again, thank you so much for joining us. If you've got questions or comments for David, Josh, or I, please put them in the chat. We're happy to address them. David, this happens against the backdrop of still pretty confusing geopolitical international turmoil. And I don't want to make it all about the Bitcoin price, because there are other factors, but even in the wake of that, it's still holding relatively strong. Do you agree?
Yeah. I do agree. But also, I think some of the other things that we've talked about, like now that there's, I think Morgan Stanley has an ETF. We have more Bitcoin ETFs out there. We have more wealth managers who can now offer crypto to their customers. So I think the base is becoming wider. There's a bigger pool of liquidity out there to be buying, crypto and having Bitcoin in your portfolio. So I think that is the counterbalance.
Yeah. Josh, we keep saying builders keep building. I know you can't mention specific names. I guess the question for my mind becomes, where are you seeing that building happening? Because it really is important to the growth of blockchain and the ecosystem and global markets as well. I'm totally going off script, Josh. I apologize.
I mean, I think it's happening widespread. I think even if we don't hear about it, it's not like people have stopped.
Yeah.
Like even if there aren't necessarily headlines. I will say I'm aware of certain new recent offerings of tokens, right? Whether or not they were highly publicized. And I just to take a page from David Brill's book, more recently I've been hearing a bunch about the AI focused networks. And I think that that's something where we'll continue to see growth. I do think, behind the scenes, folks are preparing for, or they should be, and I believe in many cases they are, preparing for big things like, quantum attacks, right? So they are building, right? People are preparing. And I think also in the wake of the cold card hack, I think lots of people are re-examining lots of things right now. So I think in addition to building and kind of moving things forward in terms of development and projects, I think there's also so much happening that is really defensive against future attacks. I will say the one network that keeps coming up again and again and again and again is Cantor.
Yes.
Right, like that I think is
Yep. We're not recommending the token. We're not recommending anything in any platform in particular. But Josh, it's a really, really good point. Can we go back to cold card real quickly, David and Josh? Because I think, from a public service announcement perspective, I think the hack now is, David, correct me if I'm wrong, over 100 million worldwide. I mean, this is attacking the vector that anyone who was involved in crypto for longer than a couple of minutes thought was the safest and most secure way to handle crypto. Has that changed public perception of getting involved in crypto?
I think it goes back to the idea that self-custody is difficult and cumbersome, and the private keys element of it is challenging. Look, I really feel badly for people who've held their crypto, held it offline in a vault or in a safety deposit box, and their crypto still were taken. It creates this dynamic where if people aren't very tech savvy, you're almost inclined to tell people to buy one of the Bitcoin ETFs and keep it in your securities account because, it's going to take BlackRock or Morgan Stanley or one of those big banks to be hacked for you to be impacted, or one of the custodians for one of the big banks for you to be impacted. And then you'd probably have SIPC insurance behind it. So I think it's just unfortunately another level that makes, self-custody difficult. Again, I support self-custody. It's another vertical where it's making self-custody more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, just to chime in on there, and please correct me if I'm mistaken on this, but with this particular kind of hack, isn't it the case that even if somebody were tech savvy, that this was just a problem that like a latent problem that had existed? So even if it was David, you or Ron, one of you guys holding it via cold card, that God forbid this could have
Even
happened.
if you did everything right, the bug that was found was apparently in the firmware itself of the hardware device, which is nothing that any user of that hardware would have, in my understanding, been able to see. Bit of self-indulgence here, but Josh, David, we're going to be hosting probably in the next couple of weeks. We have some of our cybersecurity colleagues in the WSBA. They're going to look at what happened at a pretty granular level and how you can protect yourself from it. And David, to your point, I think it did lead to a bit of an exodus back into ETFs. let me ask this question for the three of us and for anyone in the audience who's watching. For the vast majority of people, David, is self-custody dead? What's the point of self-custody for them at this point?
Look, I think self-custody is very important, not your keys, not your coins.
Yeah.
But, we've been talking about quantum proofing. People need to have options that are AI proofed. And I think we've said this, I've written about this, and I'll keep saying it. Anyone who runs a protocol or runs a device, whether hardware or software, you need to AI proof these devices. And basically Cold Card was flawed from the onset, in their approach, and it was only recognized significantly when AI came to play and people were attacking the Cold Card through AI algorithms. So I really think any protocol and any sort of hardware provider needs to make sure their products are AI proof. And I'm going to shout out to Mike Belshie at BitCo, who put 100 Bitcoin into his account and challenge Anthropic to hack it.
Yep.
So I'm not saying that everybody needs to be so public about it and put certain amount of money at stake or value at stake, but these are the kind of things we need to do to make sure that our self-custody options are sufficient, or their custodian options are sufficient.
Yep, David, good point. Shout out to Kirk Phillips. Good to hear from you, buddy. It's not just tech savvy, it's being risk savvy. Very good point. And I think, David, Josh, the UX for being risk savvy in the crypto space is still pretty primitive to me. For the everyday user, I'm not smart enough to know what the answer to that problem is. I'm hoping someone in the audience, or obviously one of you two, are.
Go ahead, Josh.
Go ahead. I think especially now that everything is being attacked by AI, maybe the answer is we don't want the user experience to become easier right now. Maybe we want people who are less experienced to use intermediaries or to purchase ETFs, right? So maybe that is the answer. Obviously, that's not what the technology was intended for. But I think right now we're at a rather dangerous time, but not dangerous just for folks holding crypto in Cold Card, right? If you look at some of the pieces that have come out lately, and the analyses done on banks and vulnerabilities of banks, I think there's a lot there.
David,
it's an interesting
Josh,
topic.
no, it's a really good point. David, it makes me think back to the fact that the Winklevoss brothers were right. They took their private keys and had them written on pieces of paper, split up the paper and put them in like 4 different safe deposit boxes around the country. Someone educate me if I'm getting that wrong, but they want old school, David, on protecting their private keys. David, Josh, I guess we've got August upon us, no clarity, markets kind of trending up slightly. What's the rest of the summer going to look like? And I say this, David, for the seasonality. I keep using that word again. August tends to be black for markets, generally often down depending on the asset class, including equities. Should we just pack it up and come back sometime in mid-September?
It's a good question. I think that there's just so much going on, like geopolitically, that I don't think you can just take the rest of the summer off. I do want to say that, looking at the equity side, the earnings have been tremendous. Yes. Some of the companies have reported, amazing year-over-year earnings and margins, and so I do think we could see a run-up, and I expect there to be a run-up in equities prior to the election. We may, see that in crypto as well. So I think this is not the time with everything going on in the world to sort of, put your computer down for the month and not take a look. But,
no sticking our heads in the sand, David.
Yeah, I would say this year more than most, I would expect there could be some volatility if things change.
David, I want to ask about that as well, and Josh certainly wants your input. We're getting away from crypto a little bit, but I do want to talk about what you just said. If we're looking at some of those markets, it is broad-based, David, and the earnings are pretty impressive for a lot of these companies. What's your thought on valuations for some of them, including AI? Because you're not just talking about market moving up on the back of AI stocks, correct?
Yeah, look, there is some circularity in some of these agreements made by the big AI providers and the chip makers, but the chip makers' earnings are just, remarkable.
Yeah.
You're seeing, billions and billions of dollar increases, quarter over quarter, year over year. And I think their P's are pretty low. So, and financial stocks have done really well in this interest rate environment as well. So, look, I think, our economy is, if you think about it, we still have two major conflicts going on, and our economy is still running along at a pretty robust rate.
Yeah.
I think we have a strong economy, and one I think that's going to get distributed more, and it won't be so K-shaped. That's my sort of view of things.
What are you basing that on, David? Sorry, Josh. I was.
Secretary Benson was talking about it, and I think that we're going to see, maybe people's individuals' income going up a little higher. I think there's just areas where it's going to trickle down more, and it won't be so K-shaped.
Josh, David, thanks. Josh, go ahead. I cut you off.
Yeah, I don't know if I heard this from you guys, so it may be that you guys shared something, but I thought that piece about maybe the economy becoming slightly less K-shaped was that, as David was noting, incomes for like lower income folks were rising at a greater rate than the higher income folks. I think one question I have for David, when you say that we should watch August because August could have some volatility, if we unpack that a little bit, does that mean you think prices might dip? Is that what you mean by volatility, as opposed to prices might spike? This is not investment advice. I'm just trying to understand what that meant.
He wants some answers, David.
Well, look, I think, what's going on in the Middle East could have a big factor. Oil prices go up above $100 again, and, there's a strain on sort of the economy and goods and services moving through the strait, or products for goods and services moving through the strait, then, oil prices go up, the market probably goes down some, and crypto probably goes down some as well. So I think we have an active issue going on that really can affect the market, directly. And it's kind of like a day-to-day thing. Like one day we think we might have some détente, another day we don't. And, it still keeps moving.
Yeah, I know we have a comment. Josh, I just want to point out real quickly, do you ever get the sense David's got like the secure sat phone and sources overseas just call him with updates that like ordinary human beings don't get? It's amazing, David. You got some great insights. Josh, did I miss a comment somewhere? We addressed Kirk, yeah?
I see. Oh, you addressed Kirk already? Okay.
We did.
All right. Well, Kirk, hi again.
Shout out to Kirk Phillips again. So David, Josh, we're running up on time. It's going to be a relatively short episode today. I do have some things I would love to talk about, but I want to know where the Gulfstream's taking Josh this week.
This week? Nowhere this week. This weekend, my children have a cabaret event that they're putting on, so I'll be doing that on Sunday, and then I'm going to a memorial service. This week I'll be not going anywhere, but next week, the week after that, I'll be in Wyoming. I'm speaking at SALT, so I'm moderating. So that's all.
Shout out to our friends in Wyoming. Shout out to David Pope and the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. You'll have to take pictures, Josh, of Wyoming. I have yet to get out there, despite David Pope inviting us. Greg Murphy shouting in. Thank you, Greg. Volatility is one thing, direction is another. Really good point, and David, it makes me think about when we talk about direction, I also layer in rotation. I brought up the AI stocks earlier, David, and I know I'm digressing away from actually trying to say goodbye to everybody. I brought up the AI stocks earlier because it does make me wonder, there is profit to be taken off the table, and then some of that rotation happen back into crypto.
Look, it's a possibility. I just still think that the prediction markets and AI trades have just been more, been sexier to, investors right now. And I think the immediacy of the prediction markets and the AI moves, have just been more meaningful to certain investors. I think the the fast money crowd is really infatuated with prediction markets.
I'm trying to avoid the dopamine spike by going onto Polymarket or Kalshi, David.
Well, look, think about it. Like, obviously, the three of us do not bet on Clarity because we've been involved, and we talk about it every week, and we know people involved. But look, if you were a crypto person and you had a view on what was going to happen, you can go to a prediction market and go bet on it. And so I think those kind of things didn't exist in crypto before.
Yeah. I mean, there is the downside of people who shouldn't be wagering on those markets do.
Yeah. Well, that's not the three of us, so.
No, but it is a different kind of conflict story that'll probably carry on for a while. David, I had always hesitated to want to wager you on something since I lost.
What is happening? I'm getting ready for this.
Hang on to your hat. So, Josh, David and I have been around long enough in markets. David, do you remember the book Dow 36,000 when the Dow was like 4,000 or something, or 5,000?
Yeah.
And everyone on the street looked at that book and said, never going to happen. I'm going to ask David Brill, Josh, to take out his crystal ball. When do we see Dow 75,000, David?
Wow.
Now, you talked about a lot of innovation. You talked about a lot of market moves. The three of us regularly communicate about AI and quantum and all of the innovation that all of us and so many colleagues in the audience are seeing. When does that happen, David? I'll bet you a nice drink at the drink of your choice at the venue of your choice.
I will say this. If you could tell me who's controlling the House and the Senate and who wins the presidency in 28, I can tell you when it will actually happen.
He just punted on me, Josh.
But look, I do want to say, like, Josh and I, our crystal ball was kind of right this past week. I had said, and Josh agreed, that we didn't think, the Clarity vote would happen this week. We wanted it to, but we didn't think it was going to happen. And unfortunately, we were right.
My optimism kicked me in the butt. So I'm happy to cede the point. You were both completely right.
I do want to answer your question, Ron. I do think if we have a Congress and a president who's favorable to, technology and innovation, I think we see it before 2030.
Okay, that is a reasonable number. I expect to see David Brill's book, Josh, Dow 75,000, next year or so. David, what's coming up for you this coming week?
This weekend, I am really happy to be just staying put in Florida and just enjoying the water and all the good things, the barbecue that we have down here.
So. The infinity pool, Josh, that he's got by the beach, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Listen, it definitely makes it nicer when it's hot, that there's a breeze from the ocean, and it definitely makes things a little more pleasurable.
This is one of those things, the three of us have what you would call hole in the yacht kind of problems. David, Josh, I've got work to do this week, and I wanted to share it with you both. Josh, one thing for you, we're going to be shuffling our AI and quantum working group to get Joshua Ashley Klayman, David, onto the working group. So Josh, email coming your way, stay tuned. B, we have a date for our WSBA Crypto and Blockchain Summit, November 5th in New York City. David will be there. Josh will be there. We will get registrations out very, very soon for everyone. We do have a block of invite-only tickets that will be available for the public. So please stay tuned, everyone. It'll be great to see you. I'm going to leave it there. David, Josh, any last words?
Oh, last words. That sounds very final.
For this episode.
It did sound really
That came out not the way I wanted it to, Josh.
I guess I hope everybody has a great week.
Have a great That
Weekend.
was not the last word. Weekend. We will be back next week. Again, David, Josh, thank you so much. It's always a privilege. For everyone in the audience, if we didn't get to any comments or questions that you had, info@wsba.co, and we will be back next week. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.